So yesterday we started we didn't start. Yesterday I think was part 2 already in Pirkei of Shemona Prakim. So we're inching closer to the end. But the truth is not really, because Pirkei Ches is a very, very long Pirkei, which is going to take us a while. But yesterday we saw the Rambam says the 2 prerequisites for Nevuah are advanced reasoning capabilities and capacity, and on the one hand, and that is without that a person is the Rambam says that you need the virtues in the intellectual capacity and regarding a refined character, but they're different in that without the intellectual soul being worked out and developed and an advanced state, then prophecy is impossible. That's why the Rambam says that a person has to have all the intellectual qualities in order to obtain prophecy. Fine. And he has to have most of the moral and personality traits have to be refined, not all of them. And this is something that we're going to see now. And the way we saw it yesterday is that the prophecy really is a person connecting to Hashem through his mind. So back to our introduction to the Rambam's idea of prophecy, we saw that many Chachmei Yisrael see this differently. We did not go into this in great length, but just let's take Matan Torah, for example, or Kriyas Yamsov, which Chazal say that which means that every shivcha, the most mundane and simple-minded person in the entire Klal Yisrael saw then what the great Navi Yecheskel didn't see, which implies that if Hashem reveals himself, then every single person could start prophesying, and every single person, and even animals, because you have Bilam's donkey talking, and that is obviously the Dvar Hashem going, and that's something that the Rambam disagrees with categorically. He thinks that that's impossible, and that really, according to the Rambam, Bilam's donkey never spoke and never said anything, and all was a Mara Nevuah. But again, that's not a shmuz for now. But I want to give the 2 perspectives just in general for a second, that according to the general accepted opinion of most Chachmei Yisrael, Nevuah is something that is completely up to Hashem. And if Hashem chooses that a little child should speak Nevuah, then a little child will speak Nevuah. And any person in the world, if Hashem chooses to speak through him, then that person is going to be a channel and a vessel, and he will just be he will be like a microphone system in which Hashem's voice will speak through. According to the Rambam, Nevuah works very, very differently. Nevuah is a state which a person brings himself to. It's the highest level of perfection and refinement that a human being could possibly come to, and that is that every single, not only action that he does, but every single part of his character and his personality and his mind are all refined and extremely developed to a state where he can connect to the divine. Now, if Hashem will speak to him, that's up to Hashem. But it's almost, according to the Rambam, if a person puts himself in a position to be a Navi and he isn't, it's a nace. Because really, there is the spiritual realm is something that a person can tap into. It's available. There is a spiritual realm in existence. And if a person elevates himself through intense meditation and through obviously very sophisticated learning, because it's not something you're born with. So if a person is very learned and advanced in metaphysics and in philosophy, and according to the Kabbalah, it would be in Kabbalah, and he trains his mind, and he understands the inner works of the world, and he understands how Hashem relates to the world, and how Hashem's sort of his essence, and how he relates to people and the essence of his own existence, then a person will climb up the ladder of prophecy until he will become a Navi, and he will speak Nevuah, and he will attain certain knowledge and connection which must happen. Now, the reason why we don't have Nevi'im today is because there's something discontinued from Hashem's side. But really, it's almost a nes. That's what the Rambam speaks in Lenten Mo'in. But that's all not really so much negeh for us. It's negeh for us because we need to understand what the Rambam is talking about. But the actual nevuah per se is not really our business. But what's our business is to perfect ourselves, to bring ourselves to the table, that we should perfect every part of our day. And that every single action, as mundane as it is, should be geared and to the greater goal, and that is to attain perfection, whether intellectual reason or in our personality. And for that, the Rambam says that in order for someone to be a Navi, his mind, which is sort of the actual tool which Nevuah goes through, right? So if Nevuah, let's say you could say that that's the eyes, right? So the eyes, if a person doesn't have eyes, then he doesn't have vision. No matter what the other circumstances are, a person needs to have eyes to have vision. That eyes, the eyes which a person sees Nevuah are through his mind. It's Einay Adas, Einay Seichel, right? So if a person doesn't have, if a person is dumb, it might not be his fault. If a person is extremely simple-minded and has no transcendental knowledge and understanding, then that person won't be a Navi. It can't happen. It won't happen. It can't happen. That's what Eina Nevuah Shari El Al Chacham. Chacham means someone who has all Kana La'atzmai, he obtained and he acquired all the intellectual capabilities, and he put himself in. That's number one. And then he has to have most of the midas, and that's what we said, that now that you have the mind is in place, now there are tremendous amount of barriers. And that barrier really is the person itself. Because a person perceives Nevuah in his own being, so he sees everything through his own lens. And that's why you'll sometimes meet people that they see everything through their own daladamas, and for the life of theirs, they can't get out of their little box. It's just impossible. And usually these are stubborn, self-absorbed, selfish people, and egocentric and very crass people. And the more people refine themselves, the more they can go out of their daladamas, and the more they can go out of the box, and they can see things from someone else's perspective, and not everything is about them, right? So all these things are barriers in the lenses of a Navi. So a Navi sees his Nevuah through his mind, but if he's selfish and greedy and lost and jealous and all that, then he will just be blind, because there is so much in between his reason and his mind and the Dvar Hashem. So that's why most of us, regardless of the fact that we might not be developed intellectually, but we just have so much of our own biases and so much of our own imperfections are in our face, and that's why everything that we see through the prism of our own greed and our own jealousy and our own agenda. And in order for someone to be a Navi, he has to have most of the great qualities that make up a refined human being. And the general categories are Ezu Asher Asamech V'Chelka, that's Eina Nevuah Shari El Chacham, Gibar V'Asher. So Asher is a Samech V'Chelka, which means that money things can't manipulate him. So he's not greedy, he's not jealous, he's not obsessed, he's not stingy, he's not obsessed with money. So you can't buy him off, and that has all to do with the power struggles that come with being a Samech B'Chelka, I mean, with the lack of being a Samech B'Chelka. And then you have a giver, and a giver is everything that has to do with Mechames HaYetzer. Is a giver Kavish Yitzur? And that means, when we say Kavish Yitzur, we mean that the person is the boss, that he himself is das. He is led, and he is led by his mind and not by his ambitions and his not on his ambitions. I'm sorry, inhibitions is probably the word I was thinking. So that is that's what we saw. But now the Rambam is going to say that a Navi does not have to have all these milas. Ve'ein v'tanai a Navi, it's not one of the prerequisites of being a Navi that a Navi has to possess all the character virtues, until we say that, you can only be a Navi if you are absolutely perfect. I know that this, for instance, is the position of the Quran. That I remember that that one of the big tanas that they have in the Torah is that the Torah attributes certain chatoim to big tzaddikim, and that is completely unacceptable to them. To them, a prophet has to be someone who has no chesaron whatsoever. It's someone that's absolutely perfect. And the Rambam says that doesn't have to be true. Not necessarily, not at all. And his proof, and this is going to be a very uncomfortable paragraph, because he's going to take some people that we really look up to and really respect, and he's going to find where their flaw is. And obviously, we are not, armchair quarterbacks that we're sitting back and giving, we're not ranking all these big tzaddikim. We're not doing that. That's obviously, these are people that mean everything to us, in our, not only to us, collectively, but even individually. If you take away David HaMelech from us, and you take Shlomo HaMelech and Yaakov Avinu, what are we left with? But nonetheless, the Torah explicitly states that these people were limited, and even these tremendous tzaddikim like Yaakov Avinu, the Chazal say he is the regular Revi'u Sheba Markova, basically that Hashem's presence on this world sits on Yaakov Avinu. Nonetheless, he had a certain chisaron, and that chisaron, by the way, is what the Rambam will say is what makes his lens slightly murky, right? His prism in which he sees nevuah, it's not a problem because Yaakov Avinu has so much shleimus, and he's such a perfected person, and that's why he can see Hashem and he can speak Hashem. V'nei Hashem nitzav alav, no problem. Yet his nevuah is slightly murky versus obviously Moshe Rabbeinu, which is the transparent aspectlari amir. So that's our point. Our point is just to contrast everyone else on Moshe Rabbeinu, but in that we need to go through a lot of great people and point out where their imperfections are. So obviously we have to take this in a very mature way, and in being mature means that we could appreciate intricate and ideas that are not black and white, and understand the idolkeit in it. Okay, so he says like this: Shlomo HaMelech was a Navi. How do we know Shlomo HaMelech was a Navi? Because it says in the pasuk, "Begivoi ner Hashem," that Shlomo HaMelech had a nevuah. Hashem came to him and Hashem told him that he chose him to be a king, and Shlomo HaMelech should pick one of the few gifts that he could have. Shlomo HaMelech picked wisdom, and Hashem gave him everything. Right? That's a Mara Nevuah that Shlomo HaMelech had a givon, and then he woke up and he brought 1,000 karbonos. That's in the beginning of Malachim. So you see that he's a Navi, because if someone speaks to Hashem, right? If someone has a vision, Nevuah does not have to mean that, a Navi doesn't have to mean that he is a professional Navi. A professional Navi is the people like Eliyahu and Elisha and Yeshai and Cheskel and Yirmiyah. These are people as a career who are Nevi'im. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about Nevi'im, even like Shlomo and David and Yaakov Avinu, that weren't career Nevi'im. They were people that did many different things with their lives, building the Shiftei Kaf for one, or being busy being the kings of Klal Yisrael. But nonetheless, they were Zoichet Tamaras Nevuah. Now, if it was Nevuah, Ruach HaKodesh, that belongs in Mar Nevuchim Chelik Beis, not a Shmuz for now. But the Rambam says that Shlomo HaMelech is a Navi, like the Pasuk says, Begiven Er Hashem, Umitzonu Le'Pchitzas Midos. He was lacking in some of the midas, and which midah was he lacking? V'yirei v'atayve. Beferish. It obviously explicitly states in the Torah that he had a lacking in the area of his excessive desire and lust. And these things, that's where his chesaron was. Someone that has that many women, it obviously indicates that this person has an excessive desire, and that's a problem. That's where Shlomo HaMelech's chet was. Shlomo HaMelech's father, David HaMelech, he was also a Navi. Li diber tzur Yisrael, that Hashem spoke to me. That's what David HaMelech says. And we saw that he might have been, he had his deficiency was in a certain ruthlessness. That to the fact. So even though the Rambam says that obviously he didn't use it against his own people, he used it by the goyim, and he killed the infidels, right? He killed the people that were koifrim, and he killed the goyim around Eretz Yisrael that were actually the enemies of Klal Yisrael. And he was a tremendous rachman on Yidden. He had a tremendous amount of compassion for the Yidden, and he was mamash a shepherd to Klal Yisrael. He is the ultimate Roya Yisrael. Nonetheless, the fact that he had this personality trait, that he had a certain ruthlessness, we see that was what prevented him from building the Beis HaMikdash. It says that's what the Navi told David HaMelech in the Divrei Hayom. It says that the reason why you can't build the Beis HaMikdash is because you shed too much blood. So we see that his bloodshed, although he used it for the right thing, yet this is, again, we have to understand what the Rambam is doing here. He's not saying that Shlomo HaMelech and David HaMelech are problematic people. That's not what he's saying. He's saying that these are tremendously holy people and the most special people that ever lived in Klal Yisrael, and they're our oxygen. Nonetheless, when we talk about their experience of nevuah, because they had certain tendencies in their personalities, that's why their lenses were slightly murky. No problem. Yeah, David HaMelech used it for the right thing. The Rambam clearly says he was tremendously compassionate to Klal Yisrael, and he used his midah of ruthlessness to punish the goyim and the koifrim, which is a mitzvah, which was his job. Yet at the same time, you see from the fact that Hashem didn't let him build a Beis HaMikdash, that it was nonetheless a chesaron. It was meaning it's not a chesaron in action, it's a chesaron in personality. And that's sort of the idea in the Navi. When we're talking about these lenses, we're not talking about the actions that these people do. We're talking about if these people, again, this goes back, the Rambam Neshitasa from the previous Perek. Because the Rambam in the previous Perek says that when we're talking about personality traits, the philosophers are right that it's better to be a person when it comes to objective morality and not revelational mitzvahs, then the philosophers say that a person that his character is refined, that is a superior person to someone who has his monsters that he has to wrestle with. And therefore, because David HaMelech still had certain monsters to wrestle with, now he did, and he controlled them, and he had self-restraint, and he was the one who dominated, these inclinations. That's why he directed all that to the right. He channeled them to where they should have been. Nonetheless, when we're talking about that coming up in his experience of Nevuah, that must have clouded the screen somewhat. So, and Eliyahu Hanavi, he had a tendency to rage, right, to cast, to ragzonos. And he slaughtered 400 Nevi'ah Baal in one day, and that was sort of his Indian. He was a Kanoi, and he killed all those shluchim of who was it? Of the son of Achav, right? He killed all these people and all the soldiers that came to him. Still, the Chazal say that the reason why Hashem demoted Eliyahu Hanavi, meaning when Hashem took Eliyahu Hanavi up Besar Hashemayim, it really was a demotion, because he was the Navi of Klaz, and Hashem said, that's it. You're not in a position because you are so angry and because you're so unforgiving to Klaz. Therefore, I need to take someone else in your place. So we see again, obviously Eliyahu Hanavi used that rage for the right and appropriate thing, yet it came in his way. Fine. So we see that Shmuel, when Hashem told him to go be Mamlech David HaMelech, Shmuel said, I don't know, I'm afraid Shaul is going to kill me. And the same thing, Yaakov Avinu, Yaakov Avinu went into a complete state of panic. And all these things, according to the Rambam, are chesroinus. They shouldn't have been so afraid. They should have been more brave. They should have had more betochen. All these things are certain chesroinus. Now, obviously, many Rishonim take the Rambam to task. It's like, no mamish. Every single line over here is attacked by many Rishonim and Acharonim that come after the Rambam, have very different opinions on every single one of these people, that the Rambam, gives them sort of their area that they were struggling with. But again, we're learning Rambam now, and this is what the Rambam says. And the Rambam, although Yaakov Avinu, the reason why he was afraid was because Shama Yiger Machet, right? Because he was afraid that it was his own averes. And Shmuel, maybe for the same reason, or maybe Ein Samchen Alanes. There's a lot of shtick l'chtaria that it was the right thing for Yaakov Avinu. Just imagine if Yaakov Avinu wouldn't be afraid when Esav is coming with 400 people, and when he comes into the Rambam Shmoyne Prakim clinic, what's the Rambam going to tell him? If someone is in danger of 400 people coming towards him and he's unarmed and he has a whole bunch of women and children, if he's not afraid, then obviously this person's senses are dull and that's a sick person. So Yaakov Avinu really is trapped because the Rambam sort of doesn't give him a way out. Because on the one hand, the Rambam says that the natural thing is to be afraid, yet obviously what the Rambam means to say is that someone that Hashem promised to protect, he should have had more betochen. Now, for that, Yaakov Avinu's lawyer would say that, Shema Yiger Machet, it's a very reasonable thing to say, even though Hashem promised that I'm going to be okay, yet I sinned in between. I'm not a perfect person. And therefore, it's the reasonable and responsible and Yiddish thing that in Yaakov Avinu's situation to be afraid that something's going to happen. Okay, so these are conversations we need to have with the Rambam. But again, let's just let's continue another few lines. Says the Rambam. So you see all these tzaddikim, elu hamidos ukiyoytzebehem, all these midos, all these all these deficiencies that in personality trait that all these Nevi'im had. Eliyahu Hanavi with his anger and rage, kaviyachol. And Yaakov Avinu and Shmuel Hanavi and their pachad and choser betochen that Hashem is going to protect them, and David HaMelech with the bloodshed and ruthlessness, and Shlomo HaMelech with the Ribay HaTayv and the Ribay HaNoshim. So all these Nevi'im, these traits. And even when we are sure and certain that these Nevi'im use these things for the right reasons in the right time, yet still, and they had self-restraint and self-control, yet still because they had these things that they were dealing with, that is why these things itself are screens and barriers in their prism through which they see their nevuah, so you have these things in the way. Says the Rambam, Elu Amidus Kyotzeben, Heima Mesachim Shal Anavim Aleim HaShalom. These are these screens. Umi sheyesh b'shtei midas hashalosh, she'enim ha'mitzvos k'ma shebianu b'perek harvi, nabem she'resh ha'machar shnei misachim hashloisha. As someone who has 2 or 3 of these deficiencies, right? So obviously a Novi is a Chacham, and he's a Gibber and he's a Kavsh Yitzhar, and he's Oshan and he's a Smech B'chelkoi. But if he has a slight chesaron, let's say in B'tochen, and at the same time he has a certain rage issue, so let's say he has these 2 things, so every time he sees Nevuah, he will see it through the prism of his Choser B'tochen and his Indian of Kas. And that's why he will interpret the Bar Hashem, maybe, it could be, I'm not sure, but through these, through these barriers. And obviously that is not as pure as, that's why Chazal always say, Chazal point out, that Rashi brings in the beginning of Parashat that all the Nevi'im say, Koyam Hashem, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, Zed Adova. Because that's the difference, because only Moshe Rabbeinu, which is obviously the punchline of this entire parak, and only Moshe Rabbeinu, that he sees Hashem through, Moshe Rabbeinu was so pure that he didn't have a single part of his being that wasn't completely refined, and that's why when he saw Hashem there was nothing, there was no barrier. The only barrier was his physical being, right? Only his, the physical object of his being, that was the only thing between him and Hashem, and therefore when he saw Hashem he saw a translucent, transparent screen, and therefore he was certain enough to be able to say, Zeh Adavar Shedivar Hashem. But don't think that being in someone lacking in midas, like we just saw, that would take away from his experience as a Navi and his ability to be a Navi. That's not true, because we see that there are very specific states of mind and deficiencies where a person becomes, he just can't, debilitated, where a Navi becomes debilitated and he can't say Nevuah. And that's what we see. And so because it's only in very specific cases, that tells you that in every other case, it might be something that would be a spaklari she'ena meira, which clouds his screen somewhat, but it doesn't take away his Nevuah entirely. Versus, let's say, when a Navi gets angry. When a Navi gets angry, it's a story of Elisha. Elisha is speaking to Yehoshaphat, and he yells at him, and Elisha gets so upset that he can't say Nevuah. And then when they ask Elisha to say Nevuah, so it says in the Gemara, Kalakoyis, if someone gets angry, if he's a Navi, the Nevuah goes away from him. And the Gemara brings the right from Elisha that he didn't have Nevuah when he got upset. And what does Elisha say when he wants to bring back his Nevuah? V'atak chulim anagin, that they should bring a musician, that they should sing music, and that music is going to take away his anger, and that is going to make him feel better, and he's going to bring himself to a better state of mind, and that will, and only in that way he can say his Nevuah again. And the same way you see that Yaakov Avinu didn't have Nevuah in all these years that Yosef was gone, because Yaakov Avinu was mourning Yosef. And if Yaakov Avinu is mourning Yosef, so you see that mourning and anger, these things completely take over a person to the point where he is debilitated and he can't say Nevuah. But every other area of, and that's what Chazal say, in a Nevuah Shoyre, there's no Nevuah, lo mitach atzlus. Atzlus is a state of laziness, or a state of lo mitach atzvus, or a state of sadness, and lo mitach dvar simcha, only from simcha. So we have to stop here, and let's just recap. So the last thing that the Rambam says, that he brings proof that there are only very specific areas in which in which a Navi has his personality could come, or his state of being could come into a state where he would completely lose his ability to have Nevuah. That is, we have 3 such cases: Atzlos, Atzvos, and anger. So, because that completely takes over a person to the point where he can't say any Nevuah. So that's why Yaakov Avinu for 22 years didn't have Nevuah, because he was mourning over Yosef, and he was in a state of Atzvos, and that's why he didn't have Nevuah. And that's why you have Elisha not being able to say Nevuah without music after Yehoshaphat and who was it? Achav got him angry, and fine. But in general, even though a Navi has certain deficiencies in his midas, that doesn't get in his way of being a Navi. So we'll get to the end of the parak hopefully tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, and stay tuned.